For today's podcast, we are joined by the utterly glorious Amy Lang, author of Birds and Bees and Your Kids, a guide to sharing your beliefs about sexuality, love and relationships. Amy helps parents talk to their kids about sexuality and relationships. She also teaches people who work with children about healthy childhood, sexual development, when to be concerned, how to correct behaviour, when to report and how to keep the kids in their care safer. She lives in Seattle with her husband and son, and she joins us now. Thank you very much for joining us today, Amy.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you and help parents of boys.
We can't wait. So to kick things off, tell us a bit about you. What happened? What was your trigger for starting Birds and Bees and Kids?
Yeah, so I had been a sex educator for over 16 years, and I thought I was going to be a rock star when it came time to talk to my kid. And he was getting ready for a bath. I think he was about 5, and he grabbed his penis and he said, "Hey, Mama, did you know?" And I stood there and I thought, please do not tell me it feels good to touch your penis because I have got nothing. But I was really good. And I stood there and I did that poker face thing we're all supposed to do, when something like that comes up. And I said, "What?" And he said, "I can see the veins in there where the blood goes." And I said, "Great, get in the bathtub." And that was the moment when I thought, okay, you don't know what you're doing. And so I realized I need to figure it out, right? So I started doing research just for our family to figure out, when do you start the conversations? What should they look like? What's age appropriate? All that stuff. And then as I was doing that, I realized I could help other parents. So part of my background is that I have a master's degree in applied behavioral science, and my focus was in adult education and adult learning. So I just combined my two favorite things, working with adults, talking about sex, and started Birds and Bees and Kids. So Milo was 6 and he is now 24. And as you can probably imagine, he was mortified by my work basically throughout his entire childhood. Yeah. So that's how I got my start, sort of an accident. And, it's been many, many moons, and it's really been so great to help people, help their kids grow up to be whole, healthy, happy adults.
I mean, your brilliant book, it's great, gives some scripts for parents to talk to their children between the ages of 9 and 12. But tell me, when do you think is a good time to start talking to boys about sex?
Kind of from birth, which is a little glib. Really, the first sex talk is using correct names for private body parts. And that establishes these are normal parts of our bodies and gives lays the groundwork for when you're actually talking about sex and relationships. So ideally, they know about the usual way babies are made by the time they're about 5. That sounds super young, but the reason for that is the sooner they have the information from a trustworthy adult like their parents, the better they feel about their bodies, the safer they are from being taken advantage of. And it just establishes, we talk about this in our family, and that the parent is their go-to source, right? Even if you're like me and are like, "Oh my God, what the hell," right? You can fake it and find the answers. And every study shows that sooner is better. And that's about safety. So people get a little twitchy about that. But the thing to remember is that a 5-year-old doesn't understand like we do. We project, we know what sex is. We've had sex. We know the good, the bad, the ugly. We get that. We have our personal experience. We've been in the world. But your 5-year-old really hasn't. So if you say, "This is how a baby's made and this is how butter is made," it's the same to them. They don't care.
Yeah.
And so it's a great opportunity to capitalize on that lack of information, or I'm going to say innocence, but I don't want to say that because sexuality, talking about how babies are made, learning that is not a lack of innocence. It's just lack of knowledge, like everything else, right?
Yeah, Amy, what would you say is the biggest barrier to parents having that conversation? I can imagine the embarrassment of, how do I raise this? What are they going to say? Do I have the answers? In your work, what have you seen the biggest barrier to parents talking to their sons about sex and sex education?
That's a really good question. So really, this is a parent problem, right? I think the biggest thing is that if I talk to my child, it's going to somehow ruin their innocence, right? It's going to somehow hurt them. It's going to give them too much information. It's going to be scary and scarring. And that is just not true. And then the other thing is, we had our own experience of learning about sex. Most of us did not get what we needed and we didn't have an example. I mean this sort of lovingly, but we just have to get over ourselves and understand that discomfort, like, oh my God, my kid's going to be so uncomfortable. It's just pure projection.
What sort of detail would you go into with a 5-year-old? Would you be talking about sex, or would you be talking about the sort of biological process of making a baby? What detail would you go into?
So again, talking about like the sort of best progression is talking about like the correct names for everybody's private body parts, penis, testicles, scrotum, foreskin with the boy parts. And then talking about body boundaries and safety and making it really clear that their bodies are private. They have the right to say no to any kind of touch. Talking about consent, which I don't use the word consent with young kids. I say agreement because we don't understand what consent means, right? So agreeing to have these kinds of things happen, demonstrating that, and then talking about like, this is how babies are made, and saying like, people agree to do this, right? They plan to have babies, right? We want to plant that seed and say, they are adult. They're ready to have this conversation. They're ready to do this. And what usually happens, penis, vagina, sperm, egg, blah, 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 blah. The way babies come out of bodies, right? And then talking about this feels good to their grown-up bodies. It's not for kids. It's for later in life. I never say for marriage. I never say for adults because that's BS, right? Average age of first penis and vagina sex is like 16, right? That's not an adult, last I checked. I mean, we want everybody to wait until they're 28, right? That feels good. It's not going to happen.
I talked to my sons about sex when they were about 6 and 8 years old. And I did so because my best friend's eldest son had been talking to my eldest son about what sex is and calls sex energetic cuddling, which I think is a brilliant term for sex.
Oh, great.
I've used it myself since. I sat them down and I said to them, okay, this is what sex is. A penis goes into a vagina. It's meant to be pleasurable. Everybody's meant to be enjoying themselves. And it's between two people who love each other. And the next morning I got up and heard my youngest son saying to my eldest son, Theo, I really want to have sex with you. And I was like, no. And he said, but I love him. So I really want to have sex with him. And that's the point where I realized that I probably needed to explain that there are different types of love and it is never appropriate for brothers to have sex, which of course was also a very difficult conversation. Could you help the people that are listening and give us a bit of a script that you might use? Probably a script you might use at say 5, and then the different script you might use at say 9.
So the 5-year-old stuff is, like I just said, like really pretty basic. And I love that you're like, oh, let me just clarify. There's different kinds of like relationships, right? And different kinds of love. So you talk about romantic love. So people who are in a romantic relationship, they like me and my partner. So you can give that as an example. And then for like a 7, 8-year-old, you really want to introduce the idea of like, this is something people do. Pretty much everybody does it. There's different kinds of relationships. It's intended to feel good to your body and to the partner's body. People agree to do this. And talking about different kinds of families and different kinds of relationships and continuing to have those consent and body boundary conversations. By the time they're 9, we'll talk about the P word in just a little bit. I'm imagining porn because of the exposure and because of the amount of information that are coming to kids. You do need to talk about there are different ways people have sex, and people have sex just for fun and just for pleasure. They're not necessarily in a romantic relationship, but again, everybody agrees, right? And then making sure that you have this open door policy. And really at 9, the kind of like puberty is happening, right? It's starting to happen. And so that also, it's like you're going to maybe start to have sexual feelings. You might start to have crushing, right? And the other piece is you do not have to be the Wikipedia of sex for your kids. There's awesome books, right? And then by the time they are 12, we can talk about anything. Don't screen. Actually, like 10, 11 now, don't screen. Use slang. Talk about what they might see in pornography, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so if we're being secretive and weird, which is so hard because we just feel weird about it, right? Our kids tap into that. And so you can say, you know what, I'm uncomfortable talking about this with you. No one talk to me, but you need to have this information. It is a wild, wild world out there when it comes to this. And they have heard stuff, seen stuff that you can't even imagine that you would never have seen because of internet.
Amy, how do you think parents should engage with their school's sex education? Is it you find out what they're being taught and you mirror that? Are you trying to get ahead so they're already advanced by the time the school approaches it? What's your advice for just how you engage with the school program?
So you definitely need to know what they're teaching because it might not be adequate. Most of the time it isn't because they're very restricted, right? I'm in the United States. So where I live in Washington State, we have comprehensive sexuality education that starts in kindergarten with bodies and boundaries and different kinds of families. There are people in our country that get hysterical and think they're talking about oral sex with toddlers, right? So you need to know what's covered and then you need to amend that. You need to talk about the fill in the blanks because they can't cover everything. And then you need to repeat, right? Like what they hear in the classroom could be good, could be, I don't know, it just depends on the program. And then giving them the information again and again. They need to hear it multiple times in, developmentally appropriate ways. So just a story from my universe, ideally your kid knows everything before they get in there, right? And so Milo had sex ed in sixth grade in his school. And of course I was dying to know how it was going, but I was real good for about 3 days. And I picked him up from school. We're walking home and I was like, so how's the sex ed? And he said, Mama, the questions those kids have. And I said, feels pretty good to already have the answers, doesn't it? And he went puff, puff, puff. He puffed up and he stood up tall and he said, yeah, it does. And then I said, what kinds of questions do they have? And he said, I'm not telling you. Welcome to my sex talk life. So my child was like, no talking. Like he told me he'd rather talk to strangers than me or my spouse or his dad about sex. And then he told me he'd never ask a question. So that was great. Really excellent for me, the sex educator, to have this child who's like, nope, not talking.
That's so interesting though, because my daughter, she likes to know stuff. So in maths or science, she wants to like be top of the class and know things. And I guess it just translates to this as well. I'm sure I had sex education in my school. I must have done, but I don't remember any of it. Like maybe that's a reflection on my memory and, my advancing age, or maybe it just wasn't that memorable and it was really, really bad.
Did you not have the putting a condom on a banana?
I don't think so. Unless I was off sick that day. Maybe I had like tonsillitis or something, but I'm sure I would remember that.
And do you have this in America as well, Amy? The period lady comes in and takes the girls to one side and talks about periods.
Again, it depends on where you live. So in the states that have really terrible sex education, Kentucky, Tennessee, down south, they might have puberty education and no other education. They might split the classrooms, split the kids. So girls are getting the period talk and boys are getting whatever talk, maybe kind of a puberty talk. So the sort of best practice is for everybody to get all the information, the same information at the same time, because boys need to know what happens with women's and girls' bodies. They need to know about periods. They need to understand that can be zero fun, right? Having it, it's a real hard sell. So being a supportive friend, right? Like understanding like, oh yeah, this is different, right? Their bodies are different from my body. Understanding about how pregnancy works. Like people with testicles are fertile 24/7 from the time they're 10, 11, 12 until they're dead. So yeah. Oh yeah. Y'all can knock someone up.
That's fascinating. I did not know that.
We with ovaries are like 5 days out of the month, right? I mean, we're the ones that can get pregnant, but the boys and men are the impregnators. So as you can tell, I get a little hot about this. But like one of our family values, we told Milo, is like, if someone gets pregnant and you're the impregnator, you are on for whatever they want. If they decide to parent, you're in. You're a parent. If they decide to terminate, you're in. If you don't like that, it's her body, it's her choice. You need to manage yourself around this and be supportive of whatever they decide, because boys and men get out of managing a pregnancy and parenting all the time. And it's wrong. It's straight up wrong. So anyway, I will calm down now.
So, Elliot, you very luckily have your parents close by and they do quite a bit of childcare for you. But they go to Grenada for 3 months every year. What do you do when they're gone? How do you look after yourself and your relationship?
Well, I feel very sorry for myself. Going to Grenada is amazing for them, but it's not so great for us. Luckily, we have Bubble. Bubble provides us with emergency childcare, backup childcare, and ultimately the opportunity for us to have date nights, and also go to the spa every now and again. Because us parents, we need to maintain our identity. We need to maintain our self-care and our relationships. So Bubble is incredible for when my parents jet off to Grenada.
Find and book background checked nannies and sitters who can be with you in as little as an hour. Trusted by parents you know. Like us, search Bubble Childcare in the App Store or Google Play Store.
I feel like a lot of the conversation that we did have, the conversation that I do remember, a lot of it was based around teenage pregnancy, and it was based around pregnancy. And I think it's so important now to just have a wider conversation. Of course, that is important, but also talking about consent, agreement, safety, pleasure when the time is right, and just broadening it out a little bit. I think for me, what I do remember was don't have sex because you're going to get someone pregnant. And that was pretty much the memory of the education that I had. And all the other information was found out from friends.
Yeah, absolutely. So the most of us had this prevention model and mindset. And yes, prevention is part of sexuality education, but a better way to think about it is preparation. Like getting your kid ready for this hugely important part of life. This is one of the biggest things we do. Have relationships, have sexual and romantic relationships. I mean, it is massive. And we get all worked up about calculus and grades and this stuff that doesn't serve. I mean, I don't know what calculus is, and that doesn't serve your child unless they're an engineer, maybe, right? That doesn't serve your kid. Understanding how this works, having a lot of information that's based on your values, which is really important, and then switch up. Like when I had this change of like, oh yeah, I want Milo to be prepared. I want him to feel ready. I want him to have enough information to feel good about his choices and to be a good partner, right? To be a good partner. Yeah. And that switch for me was like, oh yeah. I mean, don't you want your kids to be prepared?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right?
And to be a good partner, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Let's talk about puberty, because you touched on that. And of course, you know, it really hadn't dawned on me that, of course, boys would be able to get somebody pregnant from a very, very young age. But it's really obvious now you've said it. But what does puberty do to the brains and the bodies of boys? You know, at what point is it starting to really take hold and changes their behavior and their bodies?
That's a great question. So puberty for boys starts at about 10. And so the pituitary gland kicks off hormones that start those body changes. And the first sign of puberty in a boy is that their testicles will get larger, but you're probably not going to see that. So what you're going to notice is that they get stinky. So if your kid smells like goats and farts, guess what? That was my child's bedroom. I was like, oh my God. Usually takes about 3 to 5 years, depends on the child. If your kid's your bio kid, whatever happened for you, like what your puberty looked like, your kid's probably going to be fairly similar. And then, you know, letting them know they're going to have random acts of senseless erections. They're going to, they're going to have wet dreams, right? Kids need to know they might have a wet dream because they think they've wet the bed. And they need to understand that this is all a natural part of the body. Talking about masturbation, I am a super fan. Like, take care of that. Learn what feels good to your body. It's really important to understand that. And it's great stress relief. And it can help handle some of those sexual urges. Now, I realize that could be like, hey, masturbate, my friend. That's a little rough conversation. But again, we have really great books and stuff that can help with those conversations. And the other thing that happens, which we didn't really understand until fairly recently, is that there's these changes of the body, but there are also these changes of the brain. And so it's two things, right? It's puberty and adolescence. So what happens in the brain is that this pruning process starts. And we'll put a link to this great video that explains this. It's Dr. Dan Siegel who sorted all this out. And so what happens is this pruning process, and while the brain is being pruned, it can't handle executive function skills. So like thinking, emotional regulation. So it explains why kids, suddenly they're 13 and they're freaking out because you said, hey, your shoe's untied. What the hell just happened, right? And so just understanding that A, they cannot help that. B, it's a real thing. And C, you are the one whose brain, so people's brains are basically, boys' brains are done by cooked by about 26. Girls are sooner. So they're adult brain, adult body. And so understanding that they can't help a lot of what happens with them in terms of that kind of, I'm just going to go drive the car with the gas tank on empty and, oh, right, the people who can and need to keep it together, that's us. Theoretically, our brains are fully developed. So we see our kid freaking out. We like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? You're being such an asshole, like all that stuff. And realize like, okay, we're having an adolescent moment. We're having an adolescent fit. And so your job is to be like, rough, feel ya. Okay, I feel like I'm starting to get a little hot. Let's take a break. So your job is emotional regulation. Their job, yes, we need some emotional regulation, but the expectation that they're going to be able to do it in the moment is really low. And so I just do want to talk about neurodivergent kids for a minute, boys for a minute, because that's one of my areas of specialty. And so with a neurodivergent kiddo that's getting into puberty, those physical body changes can be really uncomfortable. Getting pubic hair can be disturbing. It feels different. That emotional regulation can be harder. Having things go on, like getting erections and having impulse control around like touching their penises in public, like there's some action down there. So sometimes with a kiddo that's neurodivergent, there's again that if them thinking they're just going to touch it, more blurting can happen because they're starting to have sexual feelings. So they might see someone with big boobs in the grocery store and like, she's got giant tits. And you're like, oh my God, right? But again, with a neurodivergent child, a boy, they can't help that, right? Because the neurodivergence can kind of get like some of the tricky stuff can kind of get amplified. And then the other piece is oftentimes their bodies are ahead of their brains. So their bodies they're in a 14-year-old body and they got a 12-year-old, social skills and maybe just like that socially, emotionally. So they're hanging out with people who are developed neurotypical in that age group and they talk about stuff and they share things and it can be really hard and confusing. So just want to throw that out there. If you've got a neurodivergent kiddo, just be ready and you might be experiencing that right now, right? You might be like, oh man. And so it's more complicated. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of resources out there. Well, there are now because this is something I'm working on for parents of neurodivergent kids. But just be mindful. Remember your puberty. Was that an awesome time?
No,
not so much.
The opposite of awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How would you sort of tweak the conversations that you would have with a neurodivergent child? And depending on their neurodiversity, I assume there's different ways of tweaking it as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really important with a neurodivergent child is to really attend to their learning style, right? So if you've got an autistic kid, and just understanding like, oh, they're a visual learner. They need to hear stuff, like understanding that. So using those tools and kind of starting there. So they're really great videos you could watch with a kid that is, videos work for pretty much everybody. So being really direct and not using euphemisms. So like saying the penis goes in the vagina, don't say making love. Well, who knows what that is anyway, right? Talking about consent, saying they agree to do this because consent again is amorphous, right? I mean, like I said, even adults don't get it. So being very clear, more repeating of what's going to happen, chunking it down, so making it a lot smaller. Maybe in one conversation, you talk about ejaculation. And it depends on the kid's support needs, right? I mean, all this is individual. And one of the things that I've learned that I think is really interesting is that talking to a neurodivergent kid, those ways actually work better for everybody.
Interesting. Yeah, that is going to be so useful to so many people. So thank you. What about sexuality? So at what point might you start exploring with the child that they may be interested in people of the same sex as them? And how do you broach that? And what would you say?
So that's an early conversation. So you talk about there's all kinds of different relationships. You can say, but everybody knows somebody who's gay. Well, maybe you think you don't, but everybody knows somebody who's gay, right? And so just say there's all kinds of relationships. Some people meet and fall in love with the person who's the same gender, somebody who's the opposite sex. Everybody figures out who they love, who they like, and you'll figure that out too. Most people figure out who they like fairly early on, right? Fairly early on.
What sort of age when you say fairly early on, do you think, when kids get their first sort of urges?
I knew I was attracted to boys I had a terminal crush on, Ronnie Hansen when I was 5. We were boyfriend, girlfriend, right? And then as I got older, I realized I had some attraction to girls and women too, right? So my world got wider and I knew I knew pretty much the same thing for everybody. Kind of know, right?
Yeah. I had my first kiss when I was 9. It was
Yeah.
so awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. Go you, developmentally typical moment.
Is that really the first time that, 9 years old is usually the
Yeah,
first kiss?
practicing, right? It was practicing. Like most of the not like most of the sexual behaviors, like playing doctor and spin the bottle and all that's practicing. It's experimenting. It's exploring, right? Trying to, what is this? What is this? What does this feel like to me? Who am I? Do I like this? It's just like, I think about it as being science, in a way.
I can imagine there's so many things our children do that we're just not aware of. They go to school for how many hours per day?
Yeah.
And there's so many things that they're probably doing and thinking that we probably hope they aren't, because we're just not ready to embrace it. But we're doing this podcast because we want to learn, Amy. So this is great for me personally, learning as well. And just, I guess, opening my mind to accepting that my daughters will be having experiences that are age appropriate and normal. And I think as a parent, it's so easy to not want to accept it and not want to think about it and deny it's probably even happening, when actually we're probably doing the same thing at our age when we were younger as well. So yeah, I think it's about for parents just being open to their children growing up, which can be really tough. It can be really difficult to accept.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of comes back to like, we know the risks, right? We know the risks. We know the bad stuff. We know that they can get hurt. And so remembering that a whole lot of what they're doing isn't assault, right? Like agreeing to play boyfriend, girlfriend and roll around a little bit and have a first kiss. Like most of the time, that's not assaultive, right? But we hear about that and we're like, oh my God. Or like two little people, playing down. Like one of my favorite stories is one of my friends called me. Her kid was in preschool and she's like, so Amy, Elliot just told me he's been having penis meetings with his friend every day at outdoor time. And so what was happening is that they would go behind a bush, take their penises out of their pants, have a meeting, and then go back to, I know, it's one of my favorites, and then go back to playing. They had conversations. The bush was taken out. So like this, I think like one of the most important things is that we need to really think about sexuality as a healthy, normal, natural, cool, fun part of life and take that on. And remember, again, back to this preparing them for this important part of life. It is our obligation. They have a human right to this information. And we all know what happens when you don't get enough.
Well, that leads us perfectly on to the thorny issue of pornography. We know that in the UK, 1 in 10 children under the age of 9 years old have been exposed to porn, and that a quarter of children by the time they leave primary school have seen pornography, the majority of which is violent porn. Tell us a bit more about porn and how you think it's influencing the behaviour of boys and what we can do as parents to have a greater influence than pornography.
Okay, so I'm probably going to get a little hot and bothered about this. The first thing is that everybody, those stats, absolutely, it's worse, right? Kids don't report. So your 5-year-old might see porn and be like, ew, ick, and not look at it again because they're like, oh, ick, and not report, right? Not say, hey, mommy, or daddy, I saw people doing things. So we need to understand that every single child will be exposed to pornography. It is not going to be the plumber knocks on the door and there's a storyline. It is immediately parts and wholes. It is violent. It's sexist. It's misogynistic. It's racist. It's terrible. And parents think my kid would never. But imagine you're 10. I mean, I would have been all over it because I would have Googled sex. I would have Googled boobs. And if you want some homework, which you need to not do this at work and you need to be, if you haven't seen it, just Google sex. The first thing you get is Pornhub. And you see a string of terrible stuff. And so they will see it. They will see it. Now, the best thing you can do is give them lots of information about healthy sexuality and say, hey, you're going to see this if you haven't already. And it's not real. It's fake. Those people are actors. Being really explicit that it is not for kids. It can be scary and confusing. And then, this comes back to, there's different ways to have sex. But again, people agree to do this. What they see in porn, there's no consent, right? There's no pubic hair. There's people's tallywhackers are massive, right? Boys should know that the average size of an erect penis is the same as in our universe, $1 bill. Your bills are bigger. So I don't know what you got. Hot dog? I don't know what we got. Sausage? Right? Pick
It's got different
something.
notes. It's got £5 notes,
Yeah,
£50 notes.
I don't know. Like whatever this equivalent of a dollar bill or maybe just like a sausage, right? Because they're going to see that and they're going to think, oh, there's something wrong with my body. And then the other piece is that they use it as sex ed. They think that's how you do sex. One thing that parents need to know is that one of the things that has been normalized because of porn, and this is pretty awful, is that kids think that choking is a normal sexual practice. And it is absolutely not. It's incredibly dangerous. And they talk about it. And I asked Milo and his girlfriend, I'm like, I do not want to know about your sex life. Choking. And Sadie stood there and she counted off on her hand, like, oh, yeah, I think 6 of my friends do this. And Milo said, oh, yeah, it's normal. And so why I'm saying this is because you need to understand the influence of pornography and how terrible it can be. But good news, you can say when people have sex, it's a process. And they go from like hand holding to making out to over the shirt, under the shirt, right? Like it's a process. People agree as they go along, and anything like anal sex or anything that's more advanced, they also think anal sex is just regular, which it is, but also, right? You don't start necessarily with anal sex. There's other, maybe oral, sure, like one thing at a time. And so getting into BDSM, anything violent, that is varsity level. It is not something you just jump into because it can be traumatizing and you can get in trouble. So deep breath, everybody.
Yeah. And there was a case here in the UK when a boy was having sex with his girlfriend, consensual sex with his girlfriend, and then he started to choke her. She reported it to the police and he went along for the interview, and they said that he literally in his mind was doing nothing wrong. He thought this was normal. I've seen this in porn. This is what we do. This is acceptable. I think it just hits home the fact that if we are not having conversations, if we are not the alternative voice to Pornhub and porn, then our children are going to think this is the normal thing to do. And we need to feel empowered to be able to have those conversations with our children and not shy away from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we have the most power and influence over their sexual decision-making and this kind of thing. We're like way more powerful than their peers until they get into like middle school or whatever you all call it, until they get into that 7th grade. And then their peers start to take over, but we're still very influential. And one of the things about the porn conversation, and this is going to sound harsh, if your child is exposed to porn on a device that you have given them or given them access to, that is your fault. It is foolishness, to think that your child won't see it. And it is basically required parenting now that you use monitoring and filtering of some sort. It's easiest to use a product like Custodio or Bark, and because they're apps and it's much easier to do. Now, one of the ways to think about this is to think about being in the car. You would never let your kid get in the car without a car seat. You should never let your kid on the internet without at least monitoring. And then by the time they're 12 or so, the filtering can come off and the monitoring stays on. And the monitoring, you're just watching. You're watching. And so they go to a site, they Google boobs, and you'll get an alert like, oh, you Googled boobs. What's going on? Apparently you're curious. Go over here. Here's a book. Here's a safe place. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm spying on my child. No, it is your job to keep your child healthy and safe, including online. So if you have not done this, you have to. It is health and safety. And so what you can say to your kid is, it's like, hey, we screwed up. We should have been doing this for you. So here we go. You might not like it, but you need to be safe, right? So get it on there. Another thing you need to do is check all the devices your kid can get on and see where they've been. If they've seen stuff, you need to be very clear that you need to take responsibility. I'm super sorry. We didn't protect you. And then the other piece of this is to tell them they're not in trouble. They're not in trouble. They made a mistake, right? Or if when you talk about, hey, you might see this with a younger child, it's like, hey, and if you do see it, tell me, you won't be in trouble. This happens all the time to kids. It's not your fault.
Yeah. I think that I would highly recommend to anybody listening to really check your devices. We thought we had everything locked down, and there was a website that my son managed to get on, and when I mean, I say we thought we had everything locked down. You know, I have no clue at all how to do that. So I'd left it with my partner. And when I said what he'd been on, he had a look and Googled it, and he was so shocked that he could get on this website. And then I said it to some other friends who were like, yeah, we've got everything locked down. There's no way. And they Googled this website and got straight on it. And they were also completely shocked. So I think really check your devices, even if you think you have them locked down. Type as much as you can into it, because you will be really surprised. In fact, at the school that my son went to, they Googled 69 and saw some things that they really shouldn't have done. The school were absolutely mortified. And of course, at schools, they think they've got everything completely locked down. So I would recommend to everybody to really check. Just another related question, but going back a step, do you think talking about porn to your kids might encourage them to look for it?
It might.
It might. The pros outweigh the cons there.
Yeah, I think the pros outweigh the cons. Talking to them about sex is going to make them curious. So if you don't have them set up with safe, healthy resources with books and safe websites like amaze.org, then they have a place to go, right? Like if you're curious about this, go over here. It's safe, it's right, it's fun, it's interesting, it's as it should be. And they're going to have sex no matter what you do. They're going to see porn no matter what you do. So your responsibility is to do everything you can so they're ready for that. And then you cross your fingers.
Yeah, cross your fingers and hope. Just, I know you said you don't really like the word consent, but how would you have the conversation with a boy? Because it's very important for boys and girls, but I think the conversation is quite different. How would you have a conversation with a boy to make sure that when they start being sexually active, that they really are making sure that the girl, the woman or the boy that they are with wants to do that? What's the sort of thing you would say to a boy to make sure that they've really got this right? And you're not terrifying them, because I think sometimes I
right, because like this whole thing's like you can get in a shit ton of trouble, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important from early on to establish, like, people agree to do sexual stuff. So when you're starting a relationship, a romantic relationship, you should really try from the very beginning to say, is it okay if I hold your hand? And your partner should be asking you too, right? It's reciprocal. Is it okay if I hold your hand? How are you feeling about kissing? Like, even, especially if they're older, like, how do you feel? Like, where are you on the sex thing? Like, just opening the conversation. And then helping them to understand some body language about, like, if someone says, sure, you can hold my hand, and cringes up, that's a no, right? Because girls in particular are going to go along to get along. And so making sure they understand, like, pay attention to their body language, listen to their tone of voice. Sort of back to neurodivergent, that's harder for a neurodivergent kid because they don't get those social cues so well. So might take some practice watching shows where you see consent, like Sex Education, which I would not recommend you watch with a 10-year-old. There's a great scene where they're having sex and the girl is like, do this, do that. And the boy is like, you really want me to do that? And she's like, no, I don't really want you to do that. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. So he asks about, right, what's happening, asks about their experience, trusting their gut, I think is important. And then talking about pressure. Like, it is not okay, just because you want to do something, it's not okay to pressure someone into doing something. And then you can say, you can get in a lot of trouble if you push someone to do something. And so this is why it's so important. It's learned, right? It's learned, this kind of thing. And I think also just talking about a good partner and a healthy relationship, and good partners ask questions, right? Good partners pay attention to what their partner wants. Good partners listen. Good partners find all kinds of things to do. Good partners have a basis in friendship. And, you can do all that and they're going to do what they're going to do, because their peer pressure is like, oh, just get on it.
Yeah.
Just get right on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a narrative, isn't it, for boys as well? Well, you're a boy, so be the boy. Come on, you should be enjoying sex. You should want it all the time. You should be pushing for it effectively.
Yeah. And most boys would rather have a romance than sex, given the choice.
Yeah.
They'd rather have a romance and a girlfriend with no sex, or a partner with no sex. They'd rather have that.
Yeah. That's a lovely, lovely note to end on. Thank you, Amy. That has been so, so interesting. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to come and talk to us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for trusting me with your people. And, raising boys, it's complicated now, right? And I love the work you're doing, Elliot, just to help with men and masculinity and getting a different and dads and helping them to show up because they need their dads and they need healthy male role models to like, how do you roll in the world? Because it's not going to get easier for them, frankly, but they have a right to have healthy information from their parents. And we all want our kids, right, to grow up to be whole, healthy, happy humans. And this is part of that. So Thank you so much.
And thank you for sharing with us. I think you've opened our minds and our eyes. And I think for everyone listening, there's so much value and so much to think about and so much to do. So thank you so much, Amy, for your time. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.